The Cherry Blossom Murders. Episode 1, The Last Proper Teabag. An original sleep story narrated in the author's own voice. Welcome. Tonight, we travel back to Japan in the late 1990s. To a world of crowded railway stations and quiet temples. A world before smartphones and social media. Of narrow streets lined with vending machines, of tiny flats and late-night convenience stores, of neon signs reflected in rain-soaked pavements, and of cherry blossom petals drifting gently through the spring air. Our story follows Will, a shy young Englishman living alone in Tokyo. He has travelled a very long way from home, hoping that life abroad might somehow transform him. But life has not gone entirely to plan. His language school has suddenly closed. His money is running low. And the serious young man he has quietly fallen for has disappeared from his life without even saying goodbye. Over the coming episodes, Will discover friendship in unexpected places. He will encounter an eccentric underground bar called Cherry Blossoms. He will fall in love. And beneath the bright surface of the city, amongst its railway lines, lanterns and spring flowers, a mystery will slowly begin to unfold. A mystery that will eventually lead to murder. But not tonight. Tonight there is only Tokyo. Only springtime, only the distant rumble of passing trains, and the beginning of a journey. Before you settle in, please like and subscribe if you are enjoying the story. There is much more to come. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I love to chat with listeners, so settle comfortably beneath your blankets. Allow your breathing to become slow and easy. And as we read you this original sleep story in my own voice, we will drift together into the soft lights of a city that never quite sleeps but rests and loves deeply. I awoke with the feeling that something terrible had happened. For several moments I couldn't make out exactly what it was. I stayed still beneath my sheets, looking up at the cream-coloured ceiling of my little Tokyo bedsit. A pale morning light had begun to gather in the room. Outside, beyond the rattling window, I could hear a train passing somewhere in the distance. A bicycle bell rang, a door slid closed. Footsteps moved briskly along the pavement below. For a moment, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Then memory returned. I was unemployed, penniless, and an Englishman alone abroad. The English language school where I had been teaching had closed. Not slowly, not politely, not with a carefully organised farewell party, sympathetic speeches, and little glasses of warm white wine. It had simply ceased to exist. One day the school was there, the next it was gone. Its owners had vanished with considerable efficiency, taking with them my final month's pay and leaving the teachers to gather their belongings from the classrooms. It was upsetting enough to lose the job. It was worse to receive no sympathetic word from the owners, no apology, no little going away party, no tea, nothing. I lay quietly and listened to the noises of the city. Another train crossed the neighbourhood. Tokyo trains seemed to be in motion at every hour of the day and night. They carried office workers, school children, shop assistants, students, and people with complicated lives I could only imagine. The city was vast. It was impossible to understand its scale. In England, towns ended. Cities eventually softened into suburbs and fields. Tokyo seemed to have no intention of ending at all. It continued beyond every bridge and railway line, beyond every department store and side street, a limitless landscape of concrete, glass, cables, and signs. And somewhere amongst those millions of people was Steve. That was the other thing, more tragically pitiful still. The serious young man I had developed an obsession for hadn't said goodbye. Even thinking about it made me feel silly. Steve had worked at the school too. He was quiet, thoughtful, rather difficult to read. He possessed the sort of calm, slightly distant manner that suggested a deep inner life, or perhaps simply a tendency to drift off during conversations. I could never tell. Nothing had ever happened between us, that was the problem. There had been no grand romance, no confession, no kiss beneath the cherry blossoms, not even a reassuringly awkward cup of coffee arranged outside working hours. Only moments, small things, a look exchanged in a corridor, a quiet conversation between lessons, a half smile when someone said something genuinely amusing. And yet, for reasons I preferred not to examine too closely, those small moments had gathered significance. They had become attached to my idea of Japan itself. When I thought of Tokyo, I thought of Steve. When I imagined leaving, it was the thought of never seeing him again that troubled me most. Against my better judgment, I began to wonder what he was doing now, whether he was still asleep, whether he was lying on a futon in underwear, whether he had already found another job, whether he was alone, or whether he'd forgotten me entirely. I sighed. It was a long, melancholy sigh, the kind of sigh that suggested a minor tragedy or an ill-fated engagement in a black and white film. Then slowly something moved on the futon. An arm reached across the futon slowly and squeezed me gently. It was a reassuring gesture. From beneath the sheets, Chris spoke in a sleepy voice. "Tea," he whispered. I turned towards him. Chris was lying beside me, not beside me in a romantic way, but lying beside me in a best friends with no boundaries way. Chris stroked my arm and repeated himself. "Tea." "I heard you," I replied. Chris opened one eye. "Then why is there no tea?" "You have only just woken up," I said. "Exactly," Chris replied. "Tokyo bedsits may be absurdly small, but they do have the advantage of convenience. Everything from the kitchen to the bathroom is within arm's reach." I leant across and filled the kettle. The simple routine was soothing. Some people found consolation in religion, others turned to meditation. Personally, I preferred tea. It seemed more dependable and somehow made everything better, sooner or later. Unfortunately, I was down to my final proper English tea bag. This seemed unexpectedly cruel. It was difficult enough to lose one's job in a foreign country. To be out of tea at the same moment appeared excessive. I squeezed 2 cups from the single bag and passed one to Chris. He looked at it with indifference. Then he leaned back against the pillow and said, "Ring the bell for coffee, will you, Sim?" "There is no bell for coffee," I replied. I sat down on the edge of the futon and looked vaguely towards the window. Morning sunlight had begun to reach the rooftops. The city sounded busy and purposeful. Office workers moved towards the station. A delivery man arranged crates outside the convenience store. Somewhere nearby, a radio played a cheerful little tune. Everyone seemed to know where they were going, what they were doing, and who with. Only I appeared to be drifting. Chris took a sip of tea and looked at me critically. "What is that most awful expression, Will dearest?" I turned towards him. "Expression?" "Yeah," Chris said. "What expression?" I asked. "You know the expression," Chris replied. "I don't." "Your usual one." I stared at him. "The tragic face," Chris explained. I sighed again. Chris raised a finger. "There it is. I've just lost my job," I said. "Yes," Chris replied. "I've almost no money." "Yes. I'm, alone in a foreign country. I said. Yes. And I have no idea what I'm going to do. Chris nodded. Exactly. I frowned. What exactly? Exactly the point where life becomes interesting, Chris said brightly. I stared at him. Chris seemed to regard unemployment as something akin to a recreational opportunity. His dark hair was tousled. His expression was bright. Chris smiled and said, "You know, Willie, if you think about it, this all really could not have turned out any better for us." "How?" I asked. "Isn't it obvious?" Chris replied. "We can at last live out our real dreams, escape corporate, working life." "I have become rather attached to my predictable working life," I said. Chris waved this away. "That is because you're frightened of your potential." I thought it was because I needed to pay the rent and buy CDs. Chris ignored this. "Have you never wondered what life would be like if you actually did something you wanted?" I considered the question. I had often wondered what life would be like if I did one I wanted, like Steve, but of course I had never acted on it. Changing the focus to Chris, I asked him what he planned to do. Chris sat upright. "I shall become a Buddhist monk." I looked at him. He looked perfectly serious. "Where?" I asked. "Far away," Chris replied. "Somewhere spiritual, perhaps Koyasan." "A Buddhist monk?" "Yes." "You?" I asked. "Yes," he said blankly. I took another sip of tea. "And what will I do?" I asked. Chris smiled. "You will become a darling little host in that gay bar where Kim works. He keeps going on about it." I looked at him. "What gay bar?" "The Cherry Blossoms," Chris replied. "I can't be a host," I said. "Why not?" "I can barely speak to men without feeling stammering," I said quickly. "That is a main part of your charm," Chris replied. "It is not a talent for entertaining men," I said, feeling sure of that. "Anything can be entertaining for men with the correct lighting," Chris asserted. I placed my cup down. He was probably right. Outside, a train passed. The sound travelled through the room and faded. The Cherry Blossoms. The name itself seemed almost unreal. A little glamorous, a little cliched, a little, well, dangerous. I had heard about host bars in Japan, places where customers paid not simply for drinks but for attention, conversation, flattery, companionship. A carefully orchestrated illusion of being admired for an hour or two. Japanese men who lived lives of exhausting respectability could enter a host bar and talk with someone who smiled, listened, and made them feel interesting. I could understand the appeal. I wanted someone to listen to me too. More than that, I wanted to feel that another person might be genuinely glad I existed. Perhaps that was why I had become so preoccupied with Steve. It was not simply that he was attractive, although he was. It was the possibility that he might one day look at me as though he truly noticed me, and not as just another colleague at work. Chris was still watching. "Could I work in a host bar?" I said uncertainly. "You could," Chris replied, "but with no experience?" "You have a face," he said plainly. "Most people do," I replied. "Not a face like yours," he smiled. I felt myself blush. I found myself smiling. Chris continued, "A gay as pretty as you shouldn't have to work for a living." "You're being silly." "It is certainly not silly," Chris said. "It's economics." I turned towards the mirror. My reflection looked tired. My hair was short and mousy blonde. I tried to spike it slightly in the way I had seen appealingly boyish Japanese men wear theirs. My face looked younger than 22, almost too young. Still, I had to admit that perhaps the kind of older men clientele at host bars might find me agreeable. perhaps harmless, perhaps even charming in a foreign way. I had read about these bars in the English language newspapers. Japan remained a conservative place in many ways. There were men who married women, raised families, and maintained respectable careers while keeping their real emotional lives entirely hidden. It seemed natural that some might want a quiet place to speak honestly, a place where they could relax, a place where they could simply be known. And I did so want to help people. That thought pleased me. It made the idea appear less absurd, less seedy, almost worthy. Perhaps I could help. Perhaps I could earn enough money to remain in Tokyo. If I could stay in Tokyo, perhaps I might even see Steve again. The thought rose quietly. I did not say it aloud. Chris leaned closer and studied my face. "You're thinking about him?" "I am not," I replied. "You are," Chris said. "I have no idea who you mean," I replied, smiling slightly. "Steve," Chris said. I concentrated on the tea. Chris continued, "There are millions of people in Tokyo, and yet somehow your thoughts keep returning to one extremely unavailable Englishman." "He is not unavailable," I said. Chris raised one eyebrow. "I mean, I don't know if he's unavailable," I added. "You don't know anything about him," Chris said. "I know some things," I replied. Chris tilted his head. "What things?" he asked. I searched my mind. "He reads," I said. Chris shrugged. "So do many people." "He listens carefully," I added. "How thrilling," Chris replied. "He is thoughtful," I said. "Possibly asleep," Chris said. "And he has a nice smile," I continued. Chris nodded. "I'll give you that." He nodded. I felt my face grow warm. "It doesn't matter anyway," I said quietly. "Why?" Chris asked. "He didn't say goodbye," I replied. Chris softened slightly. "Perhaps he didn't know how to." "Or perhaps he didn't care," I replied. "Perhaps," Chris said gently. This possibility settled heavily. Then Chris reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "Still," he said, "you know life is quite long. Tokyo is rather large. People reappear." I looked at him. "Do they?" "Constantly," Chris replied. The thought was comforting. Outside, the city glowed softly in the morning light. For the first time since waking, I found myself looking forward rather than backward. Only slightly, but it was a start. I took another sip of tea. Yes, tea really did make everything a bit better. After some time, Chris stretched luxuriously across the futon. The pale light moved slowly across the room. It touched the kettle, the chipped mugs, the folded clothes in the corner, the little stack of novels I had brought with me and had already begun to regard as old friends. Outside my tiny flat, Tokyo continued with complete indifference to my private catastrophe. Another train passed. A bicycle bell rang twice. Someone in a neighbouring building opened a window, and for a moment the smell of grilled fish and warm rice drifted into the room. Chris inhaled. "Breakfast." "We have no breakfast," I replied. "Then we must procure breakfast," he asserted. I searched the cupboard. There was half a packet of crackers, a jar of instant coffee, 3 sachets of soy sauce, and a dried noodle block of uncertain age. I held it up. Chris inspected it gravely. "It may be all we have," I said. "Then we must go out." "To where?" I asked. "Anywhere." This was typical of Chris. He believed that going out was a solution to everything. If he walked far enough, took enough trains, entered enough bars and spoke to enough strangers, eventually life would rearrange itself. I wasn't sure life worked like that and found staying in preferable. But Tokyo had a way of carrying you along. Tokyo was a city of movement. You could step out of a tiny room feeling nervous and anonymous, and within minutes be carried by the flow of a railway platform, a shopping street, a temple courtyard or a department store basement filled with immaculate cakes. So I dressed. A plain t-shirt, a slightly crumpled shirt, jeans that had seen better days, though not recently. Chris watched from the futon. You look almost employable. How nice of you, I replied. I said almost, Chris replied. Eventually, we were ready. I checked my wallet. The contents were not encouraging. A few coins, a railway card, a receipt from a convenience store, and a folded photograph of my family in England, which I kept tucked inside the lining and rarely looked at. I closed the wallet. Chris noticed. Don't worry, Will, darling. I am not worrying, I said. You are made almost entirely of worry, Chris said. Surely not, I smiled. If we sliced you open, worry would come out. What a beautiful image, I said. I am rather gifted, Chris replied. We stepped into the corridor. The building was narrow and silent except for the creaks. Our footsteps sounded too loud on the stairs. On the ground floor, the old woman who managed the apartments was sweeping the entrance with steady, ceremonial movements. She looked up. I bowed. She bowed. Chris bowed far too deeply and almost tipped forward into the broom. The old woman smiled patiently. Foreigners appeared to be a test sent to advance her spiritual development. Outside the morning was bright. Tokyo glittered. Not grandly, in fragments. Sunlight on vending machines, chrome bicycle baskets, small puddles beside the curb. Overhead, telephone wires tangled across the narrow street. We walked slowly towards the station. The streets were already busy, but not crowded. Office workers moved quickly, their briefcases held with quiet determination. School children passed in neat uniforms. An elderly man watered a row of potted plants outside his house. Every few steps offered something small and precise to notice. A red postbox, a stone fox outside a shrine, rows of colourful drink bottles arranged carefully inside a vending machine, a cat asleep on an air conditioning unit. Tokyo had a way of making the ordinary feel composed, as though even its accidents had been deliberately placed. At the corner, we entered the convenience store. A bell chimed. Cool air met us. The shelves were immaculate. Rice balls wrapped in plastic, tiny cakes, cartons of tea. Hot cans of coffee lined up in a heated cabinet. A rack of magazines near the window. At the counter, the cashier greeted us with more brightness than any human should reasonably possess before 9 a.m. Chris moved through the aisles as though choosing jewellery. I selected a rice ball, then another. Then, after considering my finances, returned one. Chris chose a canned coffee, a custard bun, and something pink that might have been a dessert or a warning. We paid with coins. Outside, we sat on a low wall beside the small parking area. The rice ball was filled with umeboshi, a sour pickled plum. The taste was sharp, almost startling. I had not liked it the first time I tried it, or the second, but now I found myself beginning to expect it. Perhaps that was how one began to belong somewhere, not by understanding the place completely, but by developing small habits, by knowing which exit to take at the station, by recognizing the sound of a crossing bell, by finding comfort in a convenience store at the corner, by acquiring a taste for something that once seemed strange. Chris took a bite of his custard bun and closed his eyes. Life continues, he said. I looked down the street. A delivery van reversed slowly. 2 women passed carrying shopping bags. The air smelt faintly of incense, warm bread and rain that had fallen during the night. I realized then that I didn't want to leave Japan. Not yet, however frightened I was, however unemployed. Something in me resisted the thought of going home. Home would be safe. Home would be familiar. Home would contain proper tea, central heating, and people who understood sarcasm without looking blank. But home would also mean failure. And I had not come all this way simply to fail quietly in another country. Chris glanced at me. You're thinking about him again. I'm eating breakfast, I replied, while thinking about Steve. I concentrated on the rice ball. I was thinking about Japan, I offered. Same thing apparently, Chris said. I looked at him. He was right in a way I did not particularly appreciate. Steve had become entangled with the city. When I first arrived, Tokyo had seemed overwhelming. The language, the trains, the endless streets, the strange little rituals. Then I met Steve. Not dramatically, not romantically, simply as another teacher. Yet somehow his presence had made everything feel more manageable, as though there were at least one other person quietly trying to understand the city alongside me. Chris wiped sugar from his fingers. You should ring him. I almost choked. Why? I asked. To speak to him, Chris replied. What would I say? Chris considered this. Hello, Steve, I'm keen. I'm not ringing him. Fine, Chris shrugged. Perhaps he will ring you, he mused. I tried not to appear hopeful. Judging by Chris's smile, I failed. He finished his bun. You need a new job. Why not take up Kim's offer? He asked. At the mention of Kim, I felt both interest and mild alarm. Kim had been one of the other teachers at the language school. Although calling him a teacher was not entirely accurate, teaching was something that appeared to happen around him while he waited for life to recognize his real talents. He was American, or at least his accent often sounded American when he remembered to use it. He wore bright clothes, he spoke quickly, he knew everyone. And he possessed the extraordinary confidence of a person who had never wondered whether he was too much. He was always too much. That was his charm, and occasionally his entire personality. We began walking again. The station entrance came into view. A stream of people flowed down the steps, through the ticket gates and onto the platforms. Tokyo moved with the precision of a machine and the softness of a dream. We followed the crowd. Inside the station, the air changed. It became warmer, closer, filled with footsteps, announcements, and the faint melody that played whenever a train prepared to depart. I loved those melodies, each one brief and bright, a tiny tune for departure, a little song for leaving one place and entering another. We stood on the platform. Chris drank the last of his canned coffee. You should call Kim. I will think about calling Kim. That means you won't, Chris suggested. It means I will think about it. That also means you won't. The train arrived. The doors opened. We stepped inside and were absorbed into the morning crowd. No one spoke. A woman in a beige coat read a paperback. A young man slept while standing, one hand looped through a hanging strap. A businessman stared at his own reflection in the darkened window. Chris leaned against the door, looking perfectly at ease. I held the rail and watched the city flicker past. Balconies, laundry, rooftops, schoolyards, railway signs, another train passing so close that it seemed to fill the whole world. Something inside me began to settle. Not completely, never completely, but enough. I had no job, very little money, no clear plan. And yet I was moving through Tokyo in spring and with the faint possibility of something ahead. That was not nothing. At Shinjuku, the doors opened onto a rush of bodies. Chris and I were carried out onto the platform. The station was enormous. A complete underground kingdom of corridors, ticket gates, staircases and signs. People moved in every direction. Announcements echoed overhead. Shoes clicked against tiled floors. Somewhere nearby a bakery released a warm, buttery smell into the air. I felt instantly lost. Chris did not. He walked ahead with absolute conviction. This was misleading. Chris often walked with absolute conviction in entirely the wrong direction. But that morning, either through instinct or divine accident, he led us towards the correct exit. We emerged into Shinjuku, and there it was, Tokyo at full force. Tall buildings rose on every side. Screens flashed above the streets. Shop signs climbed vertically up the walls. Music spilled from arcades and electronic stores. Taxis moved in shining lines. Crowds crossed at the junctions. It was too much, too bright, too loud, too alive. And yet it thrilled me. I stood still for a moment, almost forgetting my anxiety. In England, spring arrived gently. In Tokyo, spring seemed to arrive through electricity. The thought of Steve returned again. 100 small memories appeared attached to the city. A coffee shared between lessons, a conversation on a railway platform. The glimpse of his smile, nothing significant, nothing dramatic. Yet those tiny moments lingered, as though Tokyo itself had collected them and hidden them amongst its station announcements, neon signs and crowds. Perhaps that was why I did not want to leave Japan. Leaving would mean abandoning the possibility that I might see him again. I had no job, very little money, no sensible plan. And yet somewhere in this immense city was Steve. That knowledge was strangely comforting, even though I had absolutely no idea what I intended to do about it. Chris turned back towards me. "You see?" he asked. "What?" I asked. "You cannot go home yet." I looked up at the pale blue sky between the buildings. Above the noise, above the wires and signs and glass towers, the sky seemed unexpectedly peaceful and comforting. "No," I replied, "not yet." "Good," Chris said. "Then we find Kim." "Now?" "No time like the present." "There are many times like the present," I replied. "Not fabulously interesting ones." Chris took my arm and guided me to a telephone box. Sliding out one of his many phone cards, he consulted his little notebook for Kim's keitai. His mobile phone. In those days, Kim was remarkably modern for having one. What might he use it for, I wondered. It seemed very glamorous having enough friends to need a mobile. Kim answered almost immediately. I reached for the phone, but Chris quickly arranged meeting within the hour. We killed time by wandering the thronging back streets for a while. We passed coffee shops and game arcades, tiny restaurants with plastic bowls of ramen arranged in their windows, office workers, students and delivery men, old ladies carrying parasols, a small temple wedged impossibly between buildings, where a thread of incense smoke drifted into the spring air. At the entrance to a side street, Chris stopped. "There," he said. I followed his gaze. Kim was waiting beneath an enormous advert for Superdry beer. He wore a huge purple jacket, bright, narrow jeans, and sunglasses large enough to possess an identity of their own. He lifted one hand, then both, then waved as though greeting a ship from shore. "Darlings," Kim called. Several people turned. For a moment I considered pretending not to know him. But Kim had already crossed the street and embraced us both. He smelt of expensive cologne, cigarette smoke, and something sweet, perhaps chewing gum, perhaps danger. Kim held me at arm's length and studied me. "Will, you poor lamb, you look unemployed." "I am unemployed," I replied. "Yes," Kim said, "oh, but no need to advertise." Chris laughed. I didn't, only because I suspected it was true. Kim adjusted my collar, then my hair. Then he looked doubtfully at my shoes. "Adore brogues," Kim declared at last. "Thank you." Mama-san will simply adore you, Kim said. Adore you? Who is Mama-san? I asked. The owner, Kim said. The landlady, as you adorable little Brits say. Of the bar? I asked. Of the cherry blossoms, Kim replied. Chris glanced towards the side street. I shall leave you in Kim's capable hands, Chris announced. I looked at him in alarm. You're not coming? Chris shook his head. I'm preparing for the spiritual life, he declared mysteriously. This morning? I asked quickly. There is no time to waste when transcendence awaits. Kim gave him an appraising look. Are you really becoming a Buddhist monk? Kim asked. Chris lifted his chin. I am considering a profound personal transformation. Kim nodded solemnly. Orange will suit you, Kim said, smiling. Thank you, Chris replied. I had a feeling they weren't exactly friends. Chris turned towards me and took my hand. Do try not to worry, he said gently. And if the experience becomes alarming, remember that nearly everything becomes less alarming after tea. True enough, I said. Chris squeezed my hand. Then he disappeared into the moving crowd. For several moments I watched him go. I felt abruptly alone. Kim noticed. Don't worry, doll, he said brightly. I'll look after you. Then he took my arm and led me into the side street. Until then, the cherry blossoms had existed only as an idea, an article in a paper, something faintly glamorous and distant. But now Kim guided me deeper into Shinjuku, past a convenience store, past an office building, past a tiny brown temple surrounded by taller grey structures. The scent of incense hung in the morning air. A raised highway curved through the city in the distance. Train announcements echoed faintly from the station behind us. Kim moved nimbly through the crowd. His jacket seemed to generate its own weather. I'm so glad you agreed to this interview, Will doll, Kim said. I'm not sure I've agreed to anything, I replied. You came all the way to Shinjuku. I came for breakfast. You came for destiny, Kim said dramatically, throwing out an arm. Does destiny involve a host bar? Destiny involves excellent lighting, Kim said. And Mama-san has a very flattering lamp above the booths. We turned another corner. The busy streets gave way to quieter office buildings. The sound of the main road softened. A bicycle passed. A woman in a navy coat entered a convenience store. Two salarymen stood beneath the awning of a coffee shop, smoking and talking quietly. Kim stopped for a moment and looked around with pride. Behold, he announced, the heart of the Japanese gay village. I followed his expansive gesture. There were office buildings, a noodle shop, a convenience store, a vending machine, and a very ordinary-looking man walking a small dog. I waited. Kim waited too. Eventually I asked, Is this it? Kim looked wounded. You need to know what to look for, doll, he said in a confidential voice. What should I look for? Kim pointed discreetly towards a man passing on the other side of the road. That one, Kim said. Definitely gay. How can you tell? The backward glance, the careful shoes, the air of longing. Ever searching for the one, he said, and then added, The one for tonight. In a theatrical manner. I looked more closely. The man disappeared around the corner. Kim continued walking. You have much to learn, doll. I'm beginning to suspect that, I said wistfully. We're in Sanchome, Kim went on. What passes for a gay village in Tokyo? Then he lowered his voice. Mama-san will adore you. She adores English boys, you know. Why? I asked. You are polite, you blush. You look as though you might apologize after being kissed. I might, I thought. And you are almost blonde, Kim added. Almost. In the right light. We walked slowly past the little temple. A wisp of incense smoke drifted into the street. The contrast pleased me. Tokyo was like that. A temple beside an office block. A vending machine beside a shrine. An underground bar beneath an ordinary street. The old and the new, the sacred and the commercial, all pressed together until they no longer appeared contradictory. Kim continued talking as we walked. Hosting is really very simple, he said. You sit with the customers, you smile, you ask about their work, you laugh at their jokes. What if the jokes aren't funny? Kim looked at me with pity. You laugh more convincingly. I'm really not sure I have what it takes, I said. You do. I've seen you bantering with Chris, he replied. That's different. It is exactly the same, only the drinks cost more and you're not paying. They are. I considered this. And the customers only want conversation, I asked. Conversation, Kim replied. Attention, a little praise, a little escape from respectable lives. That sounds almost doable, I mused, thinking escape was exactly what I wanted. Kim smiled mysteriously. Almost, he said with the air of holding much back. I wish I had known then what he was holding back. We arrived outside an ordinary-looking building. A short flight of steps descended from the pavement into a basement. Above a metal door hung a neon sign. The cherry blossoms, the lettering glowed pink. I swallowed hard. The sight of that sign gave me a peculiar sensation. Something about the clear morning light, the smell of incense, the distant sound of trains, the ordinary street, the hidden bar beneath it. I had the sudden feeling that I was standing at the beginning of the first great episode of my life. Though whether it would lead towards friendship, love, danger, or something stranger still, at that point I couldn't know. Little did I imagine then, as Kim ushered me forward into the Tokyo underworld, that I would find love, be mixed up in a murder, and slowly, event after surprising event, grow into the emotionally mature man I had never thought I might become. Kim turned and smiled. Ready? He asked. No, I replied. Perfect. Kim opened the door, and together we descended the steps. The staircase was narrow. Each step carried us away from the soft daylight of the street. At first, I could still hear the sounds of Shinjuku behind us. A car passing, a convenience shop's doors sliding open, somewhere temple prayer bells ringing. But as we descended, those sounds faded. The pink light of the neon sign glimmered against the walls. At the bottom of the step stood a metal door. Kim opened it. The cherry blossoms bar was quiet, completely quiet. For several moments I remained standing near the entrance and looked around. It was larger than I had expected. Perhaps this was because the darkness disguised its boundaries, or perhaps because the mirrors covering the walls multiplied everything. Tables, booths, glasses, lamps, reflections of reflections. A long bar ran along one wall. The booths were upholstered in cracked red leather. Gold trim framed the mirrors. A beaded curtain hung at the far side of the room. The decor belonged to another decade, possibly several other decades. It carried the faded glamour of a place that had once known better days and had decided calmly not to acknowledge their passing. I found this unexpectedly comforting. A small glass cat stood on the bar. One paw rose and fell in a mechanical wave. Kim stepped into the centre of the room and spread his arms. Well, he asked. I searched for an appropriate response. Very atmospheric, I said. Kim nodded. That means you think it's old. I did not say that. It is old, Kim replied cheerfully. Mama-san is older. Before I could answer, something rustled beyond the beaded curtain. Then came the faint clinking of bracelets, the tapping of shoes, the soft sweep of fabric. A figure appeared behind the beads. Then the curtain slinked open. Mama-san stepped into the bar. It was impossible not to stare. Her shiny black jumpsuit caught the dim light. A mustard-coloured bolero jacket rested across her shoulders. Her hair rose above her head in an elaborate bouffant arrangement, more architectural than human. Large white earrings swung as she moved. Plastic bracelets clinked around her wrists. She looked glamorous. She looked formidable. And she looked at me with the focus of a customs officer who had already found something alarming in my suitcase. Mama-san approached slowly. Kim smiled brightly. Mama-san, Kim announced. This is Will. He's a doll. Mama-san looked at my hair, then my face, then my shoes. Her eyes returned to my hair. Hello, Blondie, she said. Hello, I replied. Mama-san stepped closer. You funny boy? She asked. I hesitated. I tried to be a nice boy, I stammered. Mama-san looked at Kim. No humour, she declared. Kim touched my arm and whispered, Say something charming. My mind went completely blank. I searched desperately for a suitable sentence. Nothing arrived. Mama-san continued studying me. I had the unsettling impression that I was being assessed for a role I didn't fully understand. Finally, attempting a confidence I didn't feel, I smoothed my hair and said, English gentlemen are often slow to reveal their talents. Mama-san stared. Kim stared too. Then Mama-san's expression changed. The smallest hint of amusement appeared. Maybe, she said. She turned sharply and walked towards the bar. I exhaled. Kim leaned close. Well done, he whispered. I have no idea what I said. That is often the secret of confidence, he whispered. Mama-san sat on a bar stool and opened a magazine. She flicked through several pages with theatrical disinterest. Then, without warning, she spun around and held up an illustration. You see this? Mama-san asked. I looked. It appeared to be an extremely elaborate costume worn by a cartoon figure in circumstances I did not entirely understand. Yes, I replied cautiously. You like? Mama-san asked. I considered the safest answer. It seems rather extreme, I said. Mama-san burst into laughter. The sound filled the bar. At that precise moment, a tiny, fluffy dog appeared from behind the beaded curtain. The dog saw me. I saw the dog. For a fraction of a second, neither of us moved. Then the dog raced towards me in a blur of fur and indignation. I stepped backwards. The dog barked. I stepped backwards again. The dog continued barking with the confidence of an animal certain it owned the premises. Mama-san scooped the dog into her arms. Naughty daddy, she said fondly. Naughty, naughty daddy, she added. The dog stared at me. Its eyes suggested the matter was not closed. This is daddy? I asked. My baby, Mama-san replied. Daddy settled into her arms and continued watching me with grave suspicion. Mama-san stroked his head. Then she looked at Kim. Not sure about this boy, she said. Kim clasped his hands together. Mama-san, he is perfect. Too nervous, Mama-san replied. That is why the customers will adore him, Kim said. He blushes, naturally. Mama-san turned her attention back to me. You nervous? She asked. A little, I admitted. Good, Mama-san said. This answer surprised me. Mama-san placed Daddy carefully on the floor. The dog trotted behind the bar and disappeared. Mama-san stood. This host bar, she said. Not bad place. You talk, you smile, you listen. I can do that, I replied. You make customer happy. I hope so. You no judge customer. I would never judge anyone, I said quickly. Kim coughed lightly. I chose to ignore him. Mama-san folded her arms. You wear better clothes. I looked down at my shirt. I see. Suit too big, Mama-san said. Wear little t-shirt, nice English body, show body. I glanced at Kim. Kim nodded enthusiastically. Mama-san is right, he said. I felt Mama-san had not seen enough evidence to reach a conclusion about my English body. Mama-san raised one eyebrow. I fell silent. Kim leaned towards me. That eyebrow means you are doing very well, he whispered. I would hate to see the eyebrow that means I am doing badly. There are worse things than raised eyebrows, Kim replied. Suddenly Mama-san crossed the room and disappeared through the beaded curtain. The bracelets clinked, the beads swayed, then the bar fell quiet again. For several moments I remained standing in exactly the same place. I looked at Kim. Is the interview over? Kim smiled. It has barely begun, he said in a confidential voice. I was afraid of that, I replied. Kim guided me towards one of the booths. The red leather seat creaked softly as I sat down. From where I sat, I could see my own reflection repeated in the mirrors. One anxious Englishman became several anxious Englishmen. This was not especially helpful. Kim sat opposite me. He appeared completely at ease. Of course he did. Kim belonged in places like this. He understood how to occupy a room, how to speak brightly, how to make every entrance seem deliberate. I envied him. From behind the curtain came the sound of bottles moving. A moment later, Mama-san returned carrying a tray. On it were 3 glasses and a bottle of champagne. She placed the tray on the table. Kim clapped softly. Mama-san, he said warmly, you spoil us. He looked delighted. Mama-san looked unimpressed. You pay later, she replied. Kim laughed, waving his hands around. Mama-san poured the champagne. The bubbles rose through the pale liquid. I accepted a glass. It felt strange to drink champagne in the middle of the morning, but the cherry blossom seemed to operate according to rules of its own. Above us, the ordinary city continued. Trains arrived and departed, offices opened, convenience stores restocked their shelves, and beneath the pavement, 3 people drank champagne in a mirrored basement beneath a pink neon sign. Mama-san lifted her glass. My cherry blossom boys, she said. Kim smiled. My cherry blossom boys, Mama-san repeated. Her voice softened slightly. For a moment, she appeared less intimidating, almost sentimental. Then Daddy barked somewhere behind the curtain, and the moment passed. Kim began telling stories about the bar, stories of customers, stories of misunderstandings, stories involving costumes, birthday cakes, misplaced shoes, and one evening when a visiting businessman had sung the same karaoke song repeatedly until the morning trains began at 4 a.m. I listened. At first I laughed politely, then, despite myself, genuinely. Kim had an extraordinary ability to make any event sound like an adventure. Mama-san listened too, occasionally correcting details. That not happen, she said after one of Kim's more elaborate claims. It happened in spirit, Kim replied. No. In emotional truth, he offered. No, Mama-san said again. Kim waved this away. Mama-san shook her head but smiled. The bar began to feel less forbidding. I looked again at its mirrors, its cracked leather booths, its gold trim, its small lamps, its slightly tired glamour. There was something appealing about it, something melancholy. A room designed for night, viewed in daylight hours. A hidden world waiting for darkness before it came alive. Perhaps I understood that feeling. I too felt more comfortable when partly hidden, when the light was softer, when the demands of the world became less exact. Might it be possible I could fit in here, in this half-seedy, half-glamorous world? Mama-san stood and collected a stack of papers from behind the bar. She brought them to the booth and placed them in front of me. Contract, she said. I stared at the pages. Already, Mama-san nodded. 1 month. I looked at Kim. Kim smiled reassuringly. 1 month at first, he explained, then it can be renewed. I see. You start tomorrow, Mama-san said. Tomorrow? I asked, looking at Kim, my eyes widening. Mama-san nodded again. I looked down at the papers. There were endless columns of Japanese text. They resembled the employment forms I had signed at the school. Spaces for my name, a space for my address, a line for my signature, a space for my stamp. It was almost alarmingly ordinary, as though becoming a host in a mysterious underground bar was simply another administrative procedure. Mama-san passed me a pen. I hesitated. A practical part of my mind began listing reasons not to sign. I knew very little about the job. I knew almost nothing about Mama-san. I had no idea what the customers would be like. I had no confidence. I had no experience. And yet I needed money. I needed purpose. I needed a reason to remain in Tokyo. Perhaps most of all, I needed the possibility that my life had not already narrowed into retreat. Somewhere in the city was Steve. Somewhere above us, the trains continued to move. The whole city seemed to be moving. Only I had been standing still. I picked up the pen. Kim watched quietly. Mama-san watched too. Even Daddy appeared from behind the curtain and looked towards me with new interest. I signed my name. Mama-san gathered the papers. She placed them carefully into a large handbag resting on the bar. As she opened it, I caught sight of an old photograph tucked inside. The photograph was creased. It had clearly been folded and unfolded many times. In it, Mama-san wore large white sunglasses and a glamorous crossover dress. A much younger Daddy sat beside her, almost hidden beneath a ribbon, and in Mama-san's arms was a small child, a little boy. He wore a matching ribbon too. The image caught my attention. Something about it felt private, tender, unexpected. Mama-san noticed me looking. She closed the handbag immediately and the clasp snapped shut. For a brief moment, her expression hardened. Then she smiled. "My boys," she said. Her voice was bright again. "My cherry blossom boys," she added. I looked towards Kim, wondering what I had just seen in the photo. He raised his glass. "To your new life," Kim said. I lifted mine. "To my new life," I repeated, though the words sounded strange, almost theatrical, almost exciting. Somewhere above us, a train passed. The faint vibration reached the basement. The mirrors trembled slightly. The glass cat on the bar continued to wave one paw. Daddy barked once. Mama-san turned towards him and smiled indulgently. Kim finished his champagne, and I sat quietly in the red leather booth, trying to understand what I had done. Only a day earlier, I had been a respectable English language teacher, or something approaching one. Now I was a cherry blossom boy. The phrase seemed absurd, but it also brought with it an unexpected feeling, a sensation of belonging somewhere, of having a purpose, perhaps helping lonely, closeted men feel seen for a while. When we finally left the bar, the daylight came as a surprise. Kim opened the metal door. We climbed the narrow steps. The ordinary street slowly returned around us. The small temple, the office buildings, the tiny passing cars, the spring light. For a moment I stood on the pavement and blinked. The morning had become brighter. The sky was a pale, clear blue. A breeze moved lightly through the street. The scent of incense drifted from the temple. After the mirrored darkness of the cherry blossoms, the daylight felt strangely honest, almost too real. Everything about the bar now seemed faintly impossible. Mama-san, Daddy, the champagne, the red leather booths, the contract resting inside her handbag. The photo I had glimpsed. I had the uncomfortable feeling that I had emerged from a dream with real-world implications. Kim placed one arm around my shoulder. "You were wonderful, doll," he said. "I said almost nothing," I replied. "Exactly. Mysterious. Our clients love being listened to, especially when they believe you find them interesting," he said. "That sounds rather fake," I replied. "It is compassionate," Kim said. "Everyone wants to feel interesting." I considered this. He was not wrong. We walked towards the convenience store. A row of hot drinks glowed behind the glass of a vending machine. A bicycle rolled slowly past. The little temple bell rang once. Kim stopped outside the convenience store. "Hungry, doll?" he asked. "I think so." "You need umeboshi onigiri," Kim said. "I had one earlier." "Then you need another. You are practically Japanese now," he insisted. Inside the store, the familiar electronic bell chimed. The cool air met us. Everything was orderly. Shelves of rice balls, cartons of tea, cans of coffee, little cakes, stacks of magazines. After the special glamour of the cherry blossoms, the convenience store felt almost peaceful. I selected another umeboshi rice ball. Kim chose a canned coffee and mochi. We paid. Outside the shop, we stood in the sun and ate. The pickled plum was sour, sharp, strange, and increasingly familiar. Perhaps that was how one adapted to a new life, one small taste at a time. Kim opened his coffee. "How do you feel?" he asked. I considered the question. Uncertain. "That is natural." Alarmed. "Also natural. Possibly excited," I said more as a question. Kim smiled. "That is the important one." I looked back towards the entrance to the cherry blossoms. The pink sign was still visible above the basement steps. In daylight it appeared faintly ridiculous, but I knew that tomorrow evening, beneath the neon glow and reflected lights, the bar would feel different. It would fill with customers, music, conversation, stories, secrets, lives briefly disclosed beneath the surface of the city. I wondered whether I could really do it. Sit with strangers, talk, listen, smile, become part of this hidden world. I wondered whether Steve would find the idea absurd. Would he laugh? Would he be impressed? Would he care? I did not know. But the possibility of seeing him again remained somewhere inside me. A small hope, quietly persistent. Kim followed my gaze. "Will, you're thinking too much," he said. "I often do," I noted. "Yes," Kim replied. "You must learn to think less and live more." "That sounds exhausting," I mused. "It is." Kim laughed. Then he linked his arm through mine and began leading me back towards the station. We passed the temple. The scent of incense drifted into the air. The raised highway curved through the buildings. Shinjuku grew louder as we approached the main streets. Taxis, shop signs, music from electronic stores, crowds flowing around us, screens flashing high above the pavements. Somewhere amongst those millions of people was Steve. Somewhere behind us, beneath an ordinary street, Mama-san was putting away the champagne glasses. Tomorrow, I would return to the cherry blossoms. Tomorrow I would begin my new job. Then I had no idea where it would lead. That it would lead me towards friendship, towards love, towards mystery, and eventually, though I could not yet know it, towards murder. But for now, Tokyo shimmered around me. Spring sunlight fell between the buildings. The crowds continued their endless journeys. And as Kim guided me through the crowd, I felt that perhaps my own journey had finally begun. This has been episode 1 of the Cherry Blossom Murders. An original sleep story about love, mystery, and self-growth in 1990s Japan, narrated in the author's own voice. Thank you for listening. As the trains continue to move through the city and the lights of Shinjuku begin to glow in the evening, Will's new life is only just beginning. He has found an unexpected place among the faded mirrors, cracked red leather booths, and pink neon lights of the cherry blossoms. But he still has much to discover about the bar, about Mama-san, about the people he will meet there, about his love interest Steve, and perhaps in time about himself. When you are ready, return for episode 2. Where Will begins his first shift at the cherry blossoms and where the mystery begins to deepen. Before you drift away, please like and subscribe if you are enjoying the story. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I love to chat. Until then, rest well and let the quiet lights of Tokyo fade gently into sleep.